Outside is the lantern of guidance and the ship to salvation, and the ship to salvation. إن الحسين مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة.
Lantern of Light is more than a charity. It is a sanctuary, a sacred space where women come to heal, to reclaim their relationship with Allah, and to stand in their God-given strength.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all our viewers. And once again, I would like to welcome you all on Lantern of Lights podcast. This is your host, Sakina Habib. And once again, it's a pleasure for me to be here with you all. Alhamdulillah, we are almost, in fact, today is the beginning of the first of Rabiul Awwal, the month of Rabiul Awwal. And we are praying that wherever you are, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all with the best, inshallah. I hope you've been following up on our Instagram page, and you've been following up on our YouTube channel, and you've been benefiting from our conversations, our soulful nuggets, and the soulful conversations that we've been having, as well as the mental health well-being and emotional well-being conversations, which are very raw and authentic. And we've been very, very honored and blessed to have some wonderful guests on our show, talking from their expertise and from their personal experiences, sharing their reflections and thoughts on topics that are very raw, and topics that not usually have been spoken about on such podcasts or on a platform so widely as this. So indeed, it is very good. Today's topic is about healing from broken homes and relationships, and again, we're going to be focusing this coming from men's perspective. So we're going to be talking about the mental health well-being and emotional well-being, and how healing from broken homes and relationships actually involves a process of self-healing, setting boundaries, forgiveness, and sometimes seeking reconciliation or acceptance of no reconciliation as well. And also how it often requires deep emotional work, including grief and anger, before any form of repair can be considered, like in some cases. So, healing may also include focusing on small positive interactions if full reconciliation isn't possible. And this includes practicing empathy and sometimes letting go for one's own well being while maintaining compassion from a distance. Anyways, I would not like to take too long with this introduction, and I would like to welcome our guest, Brother Inayat Kanji. Coach Kanji from Ample Therapy. We've been doing a couple of series on these kind of conversations lately. So again, we would like to have him on board and share his reflections. I would like to welcome him on board.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much for having me once again, Sakina, on the podcast.
It's a pleasure as always, Brother Inayat. And I would like to quickly begin with asking you, when you hear this topic, right, when, just like healing from broken homes, what do you think? What comes to your mind? What do we mean by when a person comes from a broken home or a broken relationship? Let's first kickstart with that question.
It's interesting, the term broken home, the connotations in the word broken. I think, without being too harsh and cynical on the expression, I think what we probably mean within it is broken connection. We mean dysfunction. It's not functioning. It's not harmonious. There's pain being passed to each individual through the interactions and through the relationship. And a home being one which is supposed to be a place of safety, security, sanctuary, when those aspects are broken, feels like we have a broken home. Does that make sense? And that can manifest in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. So I liked how you said when you feel disconnected, right? You feel disconnected from, I think, yourself mostly, like your inner self, and you're trying to, find maybe protection, security, safety, uh, from anywhere, based on your emotions, mentally, psychologically. You just want that warmth and affection by someone. So let's see now, when it comes to, for example, if we're talking about the word resilience in particular, how do you define resilience in the context of overcoming family trauma or broken relationships? So a lot of people, who have been through a rough childhood, for example, or have been in a rough relationship during their adulthood. How do you think do these people define resilience? How would you personally define resilience in this context?
It's interesting. Resilience, almost as you're describing the context, jumped at me as the individual is resilient in themselves if they survive the broken environment. Because resilience, in some senses, is just toughness, is it not? And thus, if someone comes from a very traumatic environment with a lot of pain, if you can even exist, you're still surviving, right? So arguably, people who go through a lot of trauma are quite resilient, even to just be here still. Does that make sense?
Yes, you're right.
And then you can have the other side of it, whereby we can have emotional resilience in a more balanced sense of knowing the self and not absorbing pain and being able to understand it and how hurt people. And thus, what I've gone through is because a lot of hurt people were around me in my care, or in care of me, sorry. And thus, it's a more forgiving place of resilience, right? Because resilience is also born from, if we talk emotionally, first you have to be able to, I remember doing this in the Lantern of Light workshop, a weekend away. So any of our viewers who are there will remember this in the share workshop. We were talking about how do you find comfortability in sharing, because nobody wants to share. Nobody wants to share what they're going through. Everyone wants to feel as if their home, their life is kept together in the eyes of others. So many people have broken homes. It's just different degrees as well. When we're describing it in the first question, the level of pain and trauma is a scale. We often look for an archetype or some dictionary definition of the broken home, right? In that, how broken does it have to be a broken home? Obviously, you can have major abuses in a broken home, but equally, you can have a broken home which has occurred for many of my clients who are seemingly functional, able, stable people on the outset of, sorry, on the surface, if you like. Deep down, they still have some areas of wounds, which could arguably come from a broken home. But again, like I said, there's relativity. But I'm going on a slight tangent reference in the first question because it links to this, in that when we're thinking about resilience, like I said in this workshop, the ability to share. If I can share and be vulnerable with somebody else and feel safe in doing so, and then build trust in the emotion, experiencing the emotion, it's okay to feel this. I feel safety in feeling it, whatever it is, whether it's hard, whether it's pleasurable. Some people can't experience pleasure because they were never allowed to. So they kind of bypass the emotion, right? That could be argued as broken, right? Because it's any form of trying to avoid emotion, the ocean of human emotion, as I always say to you guys, right? It's how we surf within it, how we play within it, how we deep sea dive, how we tread water, how we just enjoy emotion. And so many people avoid it based on their broken experiences, the experiences of emotion. And so resilience is about being allowed to show it, share it, be vulnerable. And then you have that trust and resilience to emotion because you understand emotion, no matter how intense, Now, no matter how mild, you just get emotions. You're like, oh, it's just emotions. They'll pass. They're waves, time, and the process. Then you don't have anxiety because you're not going to the future. You're not fleeting to the past. You're not ruminating. Just present. And it's always that process. What I call the emotional filtering process that brings you stability of mind, body, and soul, no matter what your external environment, because it's an internal experience of mastery rather than worrying about your external environment. And sometimes that's taught through, often I would argue, actually, it is taught through the pain. Verily, through hardship comes ease. So therefore, it is in trauma and pain. And God gives you as much as he thinks you can cope with because he's trying to bring you to him, right? So in that search, some people have a lot of broken kind of experiences, but that's what fixes them. That's what enables them to problem solve and put themselves back together, which is going towards God, in my opinion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. In fact, it reminds me something from our last conversation on episode 2 that we had, where I think I had mentioned we were talking about parents, like our relationship, with our parents, and I believe you had mentioned that how you're what we should respect our parents more, we should prioritize them more, and how you have a very special bond with your parents as well. And then I put out this argument where I said that sometimes there are scenarios where children sometimes don't feel comfortable within their parent circle, like in the environment that they've been living in, and sometimes they find therapy and that comfort and that safe haven with their spouses or with their life partners once they get married, right? Because somehow that current person has probably healed their childhood trauma that they went through. Everybody has a different experience, right? So this is another point that I'm putting out there. So when you said that that's how you become a very resilient person, right? That's how you overcome what you went through. So I just want to add this point that sometimes I think it's also a part where there's this other person who plays a role in your life to bring you out of that childhood trauma. I know that sometimes for certain partners in their relationships, as you said, it's very difficult to forgive someone from the past if they've like hurt you or given you those emotional wounds, right? And when this person even tries to give you that emotional attachment, like they're giving you that safe place now, but it's very difficult for you to accept it because your mind was so wired in such a way that you were always so scared of your environment, or you were like always told that there's danger around you, you're not in a safe place, you're always going to be told off, you're always going to be criticized or something like that. So even when this person is really trying hard enough to like make you feel that now you're safe with them, but for some reason you try to push them away, right? Have you noticed these kind of, I don't know, it comes under.
Noticed I am that. Like it's interesting. I was saying this the other day to a nearest and dearest. I apologize. I apologize that I do this sometimes. It's my learnt behavior. It's my wound. It's my trauma. I resort to kind of isolating, sometimes physically. I walk away from the situation. I go inward, and to explain it to people, it's something I'm working upon. Nowadays it doesn't happen as often, it doesn't happen for as long a period. I come back quicker, but not to, again, it's if someone really loves you, they'll allow you to keep working on your wound, because I can explain the narrative behind it. When we're kids, we're sent to our rooms, so there's this whole thing that we learned it, that you've got to isolate. You can't express, you've been told you've been bad, done some sort of tantrum, something where you were unable to communicate your emotion properly. Maybe you made a wrong decision, punishments, all these different things. It was constantly, and it was the old school methodology. I don't mean blame my parents. I understand it. Everyone did it. It wasn't just an Asian thing, not just a Kodja thing. Like lots of people did it across the board. I'm in England, right? Lots of people did it. Go to your room, right? Even timeouts. Right? I used to watch, nanny programs, like, Super Nanny and things like that. Timeouts on the step. People have changed their thinking processes now, right? And that,
I
is that the
remember
right,
that show.
right?
Yeah,
Because
I
isolating
remember
them,
that show, the
do you
Super
remember it, right?
Nanny one. I remember it.
I
to
was
watch
obsessed
it.
with a TV presenter. I used to watch it a lot, right? Maybe from a presenting aspect, from a production aspect, but it's ironic. Now I think back and I look at it, certain things were interesting and good, but equally as an educator who's been through the process as well, working with children, behavioral issues, all sorts of stuff, youth work, charity, I recognize it now in my therapeutic practice as well. For me, it's understanding, 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 communication, communication, communication. Why would you give isolation to somebody who's going through an experience of unsafe, emotional experiences, or anything other? So I'm forgetting what the right wording would be, but because I can feel it, I can feel my own emotion, my attachment to the little child who wasn't safe to do that sometimes, right? And because my parents weren't taught how to do it, right? And now when I therapize my parents and have wonderful conversations of healing and love, and they therapize me, we both share that we weren't allowed to do it. We didn't know how to do it, right? My dad told me the other day he never got a hug from his dad, right? So I'm very appreciative when my dad gives me little hugs and kisses and things like that, right? Because that's him trying to heal, right, and express. And the antidote of depression is expression. So it's an interesting process, the whole idea of how do we find resilience within ourselves and brokenness, and our partners, like you say, can they support us? I watch my parents, it's tumultuous at times, but it's also beautiful at times. But that is a relationship. I look at myself, it's exactly the same thing. It's just different natures, because it's different languages of love, because it's different energies, and you're navigating them like seas, as I say to people, like, it's choppy waves, right? But can you navigate the storm? Are you still together? It's not about necessarily the perfect nature of being. It's about, do we as a team stay on this ship and journey together and accept the wounds that we both have, and the way we're going to react is sometimes something we have to navigate and work on. It's not to say acceptance. We all have to have boundaries, and we have to talk through things, not for someone to say, oh, just because they're reactionary, they are reactionary. We have to work on it. Otherwise, eventually you become a doormat, and you get resentful. It's all a process, but it's a process of communication, understanding, communication, understanding. So for your partner, yes, you're right. They're there to support you as a teammate, as your skipper, the person you can rely on when the ship's, in chaos, and you're struggling, right? They're going to pick up pieces and help you, because it's just to get through the storm. But thereafter, we have to pull our weight too in the clear up, in everything else, right? Because, after the storm, once we settle, we need understanding. Otherwise, we're just a passenger on the ship. And then eventually people get really resentful. But we're trying to do it together. So you have to find it within yourself always. The focus still comes back to me, my healing, my understanding, how I work on my resilience, my emotions, my healing from my pain, my trauma. It's not me. It's just a situation. I'm stronger. I'm more resilient. God is with me. Whatever your NLP, your internal dialogue. But hopefully, if you have a partner who's got love and care and warmth and support and non-judgment, then they're going to do that thing, that be that garment, as we say within our faith, right? Be the garment that supports you, whether it's cold, whether it's hot, they got you. But yeah, that's my thoughts personally. But it's only through learning, because I've made lots of mistakes.
So yes, some excellent points that you've mentioned. And what I want to also add is that when you said that there's of course we have different relationships, like depends on our bonds. Like, some people can be very close to their parents, while some people can be very close to their partners. And of course sometimes, like, everybody is different. For example, of course our parents are our main focus. They've done so much for us in our lives and everything. So when it comes to the challenges, right, like, let's go back to the root, the foundation, and understand that what causes these triggers basically in dysfunctional families. Why do these problems and emotions arise in the first place? Is it because of our culture? Is it because of the generational trauma that's been passed down from ancestors to ancestors? Is it the environmental factor? Is it the influencing bit that takes place? It could be due to the media, the TV shows, what we're watching. What do you think? Like, why do people react in certain situations? Why is it that if a father was not used to giving hugs to his son, and now that son wants to break that generational trauma, right? Now he wants to be different for his children in the future. So why do you think, where does this like come from?
Interesting, interesting. Many different ideas shared in that expanding of your question. Let's go around. Okay, so firstly, parents. Like you just mentioned a comment which triggered a thought or catalyzed a thought, if you like, rather than triggered. Um, in that you said parents naturally, because they give birth to you, look after you, they're there first to some degree. Unfortunately, in sad times where relationships don't work out, or parents often are still there. All sorts of reasons why parents arguably are most important. But equally, when your wife becomes a parent herself of your children, well, it's a deep philosophical one as to who has more importance, right? Because you could argue now Jannah is at the feet of the mother. Also, where does that place this mother with the other mother? Is it only for the perspective of the child? Or do I, as the husband, also? I've deep this. I've sat there many hours, right, Skinners? It's strange, right? But I don't have a definitive answer because I've never sat and really spoken at length, maybe with an Islamic cleric, right? But I've just really pontificated this thought, like, that's interesting, right? Because if you think poetically about meaning, it could mean both. But anyway, the point being is love, 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 love. Whatever the case may be, we have to show equal love to people because it's all about human consciousness. So we can do definitives about roles and people in your life, but I try and just understand it from a place of deep connection and human consciousness and love. Because if it's a stranger on the street or your partner or your parent, I think the Prophet would equally distribute love. It's just based on the connection of the human who accesses more love from him. Does that make sense? But his willingness to give love is not tempered or measured based on any individual role somebody has in his life, right? And if I'm using that as my goal, my archetype, my aim, as a message to myself or for my human consciousness and experience, then arguably that's all I want to do. And so why do people have, going to the second part of the question, why do people have issues with this? Why do people have broken homes and problems around communication and relationships, whether parents, partners, kids? It's a lack of love to oneself, the ability to express love. No love is safe because it does start when you're young, unfortunately. Because I say unfortunately, only because we would all love to live in a utopian society where we live the perfect existence because heaven seems like a beautiful place. But we're not in heaven, we're here. And therefore, we have to accept 0 to 7 when we are building the understanding of this human existence. What is human consciousness? We're understanding emotion first, and it's raw and intense. We have no rationalization, we have no critical mind, we have nothing other to assist us in the early years of 0 to 7. We're sleeping the first couple of years, and thereafter, the next 5 years, we're really just playing through our emotions, living in place of imagination and suggestibility. So then, as a result, when you have mad traumatic experiences from the off, based upon the environment of your family, based upon their helplessness in the situation because they didn't understand themselves, because they were traumatized by their parents, like you said, generational trauma, whether people say it's DNA past or whether it is environmentally past, it is all due to human consciousness, our energy, how we deal with people, right? And how we deal with ourselves. And therefore, it's unfortunate, yes, to some degree, that's where the struggle begins. But it's also part of the test of learning oneself and going back to God, the cyclical fashion of karmatic movement, right? So one can argue, yes, it's hard to have early years pain in just wanting to experience what it is to be human and emotion. And then it is built upon, obviously, as we then have a rational mind, which kicks in for our hypervigilance and survival needs, the critical mind around 7, 8 years old. And therefore, if you have more traumatic experiences because the environment hasn't changed and people haven't healed yet, and parents are still passing it on, in fact, they can sometimes get worse as they have more kids, right? It's all a minefield of just how each individual is journeying. And that's why it's so versatile and varied based on every individual journey, because there's some beauty and there's some hardship all the time. Even in individuals, which you see, some people who can be really toxic to you can also be really beautiful. And that confuses you even more. We have all these modern terms of narcissism and this and that to describe these. But essentially, for me, underneath it all, if you're willing to forgive and understand, anyone can change. Like we listen to our stories of Horde and other things like that, right? And it's just love, isn't it? It's just love.
Yeah,
Again.
yeah, I think it's also the society, like the way the society sometimes judges you or passes comments which are very unnecessary, irrelevant. And as you said, like, for example, why do we feel why is there a comparison in the first place? Why do we compare our families or an individual to another individual? We're in this dunya, and of course nobody is perfect. Everybody has their own imperfections, and we need to just embrace and go with the flow, move on in life. So sometimes because of these judgments, misconceptions, I feel and I believe that it has to do with our culture somewhere. The patriarchy system, and uh I don't know. It's I don't know if what to say, but like,
I think you
yeah.
raised a good point. Sorry to overlap. I mean, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of the patriarchy? Because as I said, it inspired me again.
I
But
think I just believe this patriarchy, it comes because of our culture. That's all. Like, I don't know, it's the Indian culture, and mixed with British, I don't know, colonialism, I don't know what, but
Look,
yeah.
these are fascinating discussions because I sit in Ubers all the time because I hardly ever drive anymore. And we talk all the time, the different people from around the world who are driving me around, right? And as we do, we talk about these things, and often they're from different backgrounds of, let's say, migrant natures. And we discuss comparatively living in England to the English, get into these discussions of background and history and culture. And what I realize in all of it, even from my journeying, and we live in a very cosmopolitan society, a very multicultural society in the UK, which I love. But I grew up in an English village. I'm East African. I'm Muslim. Forefathers may be Hindu, from west of India. Done some research before that. We've got a beautiful documentary made by the Khoja community, which tells us maybe we're from a Persian region of like Afghanistan, Pakistan borders, right? Who moved to West India, and then we traveled down with the Arabs and Persians and became Muslim. So when you think about it, even anthropologically, like the movement of people, we're all from Adam. Are we all then from Africa and then spread out? When you look at history, like culture is the world. You could argue is patriarchal, could you not? If you look at history and you look at it deeply, right? I think sometimes we do trauma comparison pods, even in culture. What is worse, the Afghani in patriarchy or the Indian? What is the Gulf worse than African, right? They all have their natures of societal conformity. You grew up in a village first, and then you expand and you expand, and you have to be accepted. So you create rules for each other, societal rules. So whether that's in a religious framework or a cultural, they always are there in somewhat of form to keep people in harmony at first, but sometimes it can also create the disharmony when the system becomes too constraining on the individual. It's the individual versus the system, right? And that's shown in politics, government, anything. So when we look at culture, yes, the migrants were trying to survive. First and foremost, did not have time for their emotions. So whether it was East African, whether it was Indian, you can argue that many people of migrancy, I work with lots of clients from the African, to as I say, the English, to the Jewish community, to the Muslim community, to the Hindu community. There's many migrants within it. And the migrant stories are very similar in terms of you've got to survive first. So emotions are very secondary. But then, like I said at the beginning of this, when I speak to English people, and what's the reason, for instance, for their survivalist mechanisms, equally, people in those cultures of the West, you could argue, have their reasons for why they moved into those mindsets, of industry, the coal mines and steel and all these different things in England. They weren't pretty environments. They're hard, tough, rough environments. In the working class, they don't have time necessarily to sit on emotions. If you think about World War I and II, some of my friends whose parents were in the war, right, they're very military. It's very survival. It's very patriarchal, right? Woman is at home looking after a homemaker, homes. So it's interesting. We argue that we have it different. But I don't know. I don't know if it's just human beings, arguably, and just the nature of humans in how we police one another, how we genderize one another, how we, argue roles of superiority. It's power, the feeling of power. It's communication lines. It's expectation. It's idealism. But then obviously, it's like I say, learn through culture and practice and religion, depending on the environment and the individuals in those settings. But I mean, like when I really break it down, when you're forced to, like you have made me right now in this moment, I want to say, yeah, it's just Indianness or it's just East African. But I equally know, like I say, That might be the case for certain Arab friends of mine or African friends of mine. They can't, if they're, let's say, female, let's say, I remember when I was a youth worker, female genital mutilation was a massive issue in the African community. We had to do workshops on it because young people were facing this in the UK. Obviously, we're from African origins. Like, so, you can argue, there's so many things about patriarchy that are practiced through cultural habits, symptoms, behaviors. But underneath it all, like I say, when you look at the scale of the world, they're just different degrees of behaviors based upon conformity. But everybody, has suffered some degree of patriarchy, it seems. And I can admit that as a man, right? Because you can see it played out again and again and again through time.
Absolutely. You've mentioned a good point, and I think it's still going on. Like, it's not completely over. Even in modern scenarios, in modern societies, there's still that hint and that trace that still exists. It's just, I think, the part of the universe, the way the world works. I don't know. Maybe it's just the way the world is supposed to work. Um,
That's an
so
interesting one. Is it the way the world is supposed to work? I don't know, because I've got to challenge it. I mean, I know we have our agenda of questions to get through, but it's interesting if we ponder on this for a second, Skinner. Right? Like we said, patriarchy. If it's happened in Roman time, Greek times, Egyptian times, like Arab, Mongolians, right? Like you can look at so many dynasties, the Babylonian times, right? You can look at Native America. You can go on and on. There are men have an alpha nature of hunting and gathering and risking their lives and everything other. And in that process of survival, let's look at it in its most primitive sense. There's some hierarchy of thinking. Without that, I cannot survive. I can make my environment at home as peaceful and harmonious, and I can produce children, but if there's nothing to feed them, what happens? If I'm not protected when I'm attacked, what happens? So on a primitive sense, men and women sometimes is this unfortunate nature of, that's why I'm talking about survival, right? We kick into our survival thinking, the hypervigilance thinking, the non-safe, the non-secure. That's where critical mind comes from. I've got to calculate my way through this. And in that kind of environment of emotional understanding, you get more patriarchy, right? Because it's a bit more transactional, right? In the thinking process. That's why we have a different discussion now also with the rise in women being the provider, the protector, the hunter-gatherer, right? Because people who are not emotionally connected identify with the role, right? And it's like, I don't need you. I have more power, right? So, but really, these are just exchanges of learning and survival, right? If we have survival covered, I'm now just learning what it is to be a human and emotion and human consciousness, right? And we just kind of cut it up now as to what is survival with our partners. Hopefully, if we have good relationships, what do you want to do to help survive? What do I do? Do you want to work a little bit? I'm not going to work a bit. Do you want me to be traveling abroad? Do you want me to scale down so I'm making less money? So I'm actually here though. Do you want a private business? Do you want to do salary? These are all discussions you've got to have because they all affect your time together, and it's all about survival, right? But the patriarchy in it, like I say, is culturally is down to, again, who taught you the roles of male and female? When I look at my parents, I'm a Khoja, but my mum's a CEO. She's a director. So I don't have that same hang up that some of my friends have, who arguably, in the best of intentions, their mums were homemakers, right? But I have a different issue, right? In that I have some abandonment issues because my mom worked too hard, right? And I even tell her now, you work too hard, right? So it's like a seesaw. Who's better off? We're just learning how to balance this. And when we find the utopia, as we said, then we can say, we live in the perfect existence. But until then, you're right. Quite patriarchal, our world, but that would be my understanding of why it is. We always need to know the why to get real understanding, so we have forgiveness within it also. What's your thoughts, if any?
yeah, definitely. I agree with you because even I've watched my mom being a working woman for several years, and there's always been a very like a balanced relationship between my dad and my mom. We've never seen that, it always has to be the patriarchal way, like, a woman should not step out of the house, for example. When sometimes the requirements are too tough, and the needs are there, then there's nothing wrong with it. We need to have a balance, basically. And there have been even roles where I've seen my dad do the house chores, for example. So it wasn't like something uh basically awkward. Like, some people would say, oh, why is your dad like preparing lunch boxes for you while you're going to school? It wasn't that situation in our house, because dad was also working, and there were days when he was also preparing lunch boxes for us, and then there were days when mom was taking care of us at home, and there were days when she would be working overtime. So I think it's pretty much on the mindset of a person. Like, what is your perspective on life? What is your mindset? How open minded are you? And not that everything should be, like limited. Yeah, sometimes you just need to have that open box, allowing yourself
The
to
irony is, no, no, it's
explore.
beautiful what you're saying.
Yeah,
Like, because the irony is survival, right, is actually in adaptability and flexibility.
yeah,
Right? So
exactly.
the more adaptable and flexible are, the easier you are to survive in this world, right? History teaches us that, right? So when you look at a parent who is able to connect with their kid and become more in tune with their child in the modern age, where we're not having to survive in the same way, at least not necessarily all of us. Obviously, there's a large percentage who live still in mass poverty. But when you look at the modernity, the world of modernity is a different form of survival now, right? To the old, hunter-gatherer. And as I say, within that context, we have more emotional needs of survival, right? Because we have less time. Arguably in that society where they had less, they had more in a different nature and form. And so, in terms of time spent with a father, if it means making your lunch, it's an amazing, amazing, activity of connection, human connection, right? Because it's all just about memories and building emotions. How do you understand your emotions? How do you frame them? My dad used to make me lunch, right? That'll give you so many understanding of feelings and emotions in a most pleasurable way, right? That enables you later in life to have resilience.
Absolutely. It actually just changes your perspective of life, makes things much easier for you, even when you get into a new relationship, right? You don't always have those certain very rigid, solid expectations now from your partner. You become, as you said, you adapt yourself, you become more flexible to the situation. And there are less clashes, for example, of, oh no, you are assigned and designated for just this particular role, and so just stick to it, and you have to do this role, and so we can't like basically have a balance, or we can't switch our roles for a day or two, because that would be too awkward. I feel like sometimes one of the reasons why people come from dysfunctional families is this reason as well. When you limit your roles, that okay, if this is a woman, then she's just supposed to be in the kitchen, and if she, for example, wants to pursue something, then she shouldn't be given that freedom, because she would go overboard, and then the house would be chaotic, and vice versa for the man. But like, if we try to have a nice good understanding, a mutual respect for each other, and what do you say, compromise, right? So things become quite smoother in life, you,
I
you know
think you're spot on. I think you're spot on. I think bring it back to that
Mm.
conversation of broken homes, because I know we've gone on some interesting tangents of thought today, which is nice. But bring it full circle. You're so right, because it comes from the understanding and communication, right? Compromise, again, we use as a word and a term that some people can sometimes have connotations of transaction and different things. But if we understand it from a deeper sense, compromise is merely promise. Think about the word promise, compromise, right? There's some contractual promise I'm making to you. So if you can make that deeper on a heartly, emotional basis, right? You can think that, okay, I'm making a promise to you that I will not make my emotions superior to yours. I will understand yours in this moment because I love you as much as I love myself, arguably, right? In this moment. I know that one should always love themselves enough so they can give to others, but arguably in these moments, we love each other deeply, right? And so that's why we're able to compromise. You give your life for your partner, for your child, for your parent, right? So when I think about, the whole broken homes, why do we get to those degrees of extremity, domestic violence, abuse, psychological abuse, spiritual abuse, sexual abuse? And that comes in all sorts of different forms, right? Any dysfunction, drug abuse, addictions, self harm, mental health, When you get into the medical stages, people have bipolar, all sorts of things, manic depression, schizophrenia, autism, all these different diagnostics of the modern age. When I look at it as a therapist and I have to work with individuals and I see even people of neurotypical, neurodiverse natures, for me, it all comes down to, how did your emotional experience begin? How did your parents' emotional experiences relate to you before you even born, right? And their parents, And he said, I'm now starting to understand the great kind of teachings even more on another percentage of depth when we think about, Imam Ali and Islam, and the idea of looking to people's generation. Even, they talk about in war, he would not hurt or kill certain people because he would look at generation, because I look at that now in therapeutic, that's generational trauma. There's going to be somebody who breaks the thing and heals and becomes Muslim, becomes submission to God. Right? If you look at it in a wider sense, forget the framework of, fiqh, but somebody's going to go submit to God entirely in that chain. So we want to keep that human consciousness alive, because that's a curve of learning. If there's no curve of learning, then we cut the weed, right? I was philosophizing over one day, but it really relates to this, right? Because when I think about it, it's that idea that human beings all have the ability to change, and we have to give them opportunity. And some people go through some real traumatic situations where arguably, is there any room for forgiveness? And I remember even doing this thing where we were doing documentaries around people who have restorative justice, where they meet the killers of their kids and things like that, the abusers of their kids who had just come out of prison or on the last years of prison or have done reform in prison. And it's amazing. They're always godly people in some nature and form, because you can't, it's just impossible. How do you go see the person who took the one thing you loved? Right. But in those circumstances, I see the depth of our teachings, and it really makes you think, wow, everything is about love and forgiveness, pain, trauma, healing, right? On the basic level. We can complicate it, but people have mad behaviors because of their experiences of love in the initial stages of life. And then, like I say, full circle, they sit in front of the person they've harmed and done such mentally ill behaviors, arguably. And then they're in a place of healing. It's powerful. It's powerful, right? So, just thinking aloud in this moment, and I've reached upon that, it really makes me recognize, Sakina, that if your partner, your parent, anybody is abusive, it's not to just take the abuse and be a doormat, like we said. We have to have boundaries. But if we have the ability to stay within the relationship because we see something of beauty within it, and we understand that it's just deep trauma, and that person is willing to work upon it, and we can authentically turn up and tell them that this is trauma, this is your wound, this is you being reactive, this is you being abusive, this is you projecting your pain, hurting people through your hurt. If people are willing to work, then we have room, because we have a journey then, isn't it? If we don't have room like that, sometimes in the worst extreme cases I've seen, and I've had to advise you have to step away from your family, because not everybody is ready to heal like that, and sometimes we have to, like Prophet Noor, show light from afar, right? You can't force it. Sometimes it's, again, this comes back to that cup analogy. I don't want poison in my cup. I can't feed myself or other people from it. So it is always a balancing act. And so you can't give these black and whites of who is toxic, who is abusive, who is not. Like I say, I've had some hard abuses in my life, but I've also given lots of forgiveness to people because I can see why, it's always about the why. And it's always, like I say, their willingness to grow and show love in all other areas, as well as the area which we're trying to heal within. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that doesn't. The fact that you said, it's all about forgiveness and love, right? There's this question in my mind, like, a person who goes through a lot of trauma in their lives, do they, at some point in their lives, like as they mature over the years, do these same people become more forgiving? Like, because they've been through so much now, these are, they're broken hearts, and so I feel like they understand that painful, deep pain on a threshold, or on, like, more deeply. So, like, do you think that, these people turn out to be more forgiving, or do you think they turn out to be more resentful?
Life is a journey full of
Yeah.
tests. right? In my failure comes my success. So, how many times we fail is based on the journey. So you can't predict it. It goes back to the horse story. Some people never ever remove the pain, right? They hold it, they become more bitter and more bitter and more bitter. And maybe they do even change, but I never meet them again. Because in the time that our ships met, the multiple times, they still held the pain. I don't know. Only God knows. That's why only God can judge. But it seems for the time that I knew them, they just got worse and worse. Right. So that thing of like, because I go through trauma, does it guarantee? No, never, never. But as we said, verily through hardship comes ease. Because if we can understand the hardship, if we can heal, if we can do everything we've talked about, then yes, naturally, because I have had a relationship with pain of depth, that I have accepted, gone through, worked through, and understood. So then thereafter, if I'm working with somebody who's going through the midst of the war and the pain, naturally, like a sergeant, military general, I can say, I help you on a level of first resilience on the just the outer. And then as someone who's deeply felt it internally as a human experience, as the individual, the child, the inner child, I can also aid you from an emotional standpoint, right? Just from the safety and security aspect. So from the internal to external, of course, if we can master our own journey in that experience of pain, then naturally it will translate to aid others. But that still comes back to us, right? What is that relationship of understanding with why I'm going through what I'm going through? Is it a bitter one? Is it a resentful one? Or is it one of, thank you, acceptance? Okay, it's hard, but I get it. I get it.
Right. So I think we've got a good answer over there. As you said, everybody has their own journey, and everybody, masters it in their own way. Yeah. So things, appear in life, challenges come across, hardships come, a lot of I don't know, new, like every day becomes a new challenge at times, and then you have to make the decision, like how do you want to go about it? What decision have you made? And yeah, I guess that's how it is.
Well, I think
Right.
because, just to conclude on that, it's like,
Yeah.
if for as many victory stories you hear, you won't hear the sad stories, right? And sometimes we have that where we celebrate only once somebody is overcome. But we don't know everyone who overcomes, we don't know everyone who fails, right? It's just examples we've seen and how emotionally attached we are to those examples. So it might be someone in your family who had real struggles and never overcame it. You're like, people who go through real trauma and hardship, you want to avoid it. You don't see, that there is shining light at the end in all this kind of stuff, right? So you might have a cynicism around people who go through trauma and pain. So you find it hard to be around people who are going through that part of their journey. So you avoid them, right? But if you have somebody in your family who went through that cycle and comes out the other end, you have a much more forgiving, understanding, and loving, perspective on people who are in that journey. So you have more hope almost. And like you say, you look to people like, these are the people who have deep understanding though, because I've seen many examples of them who come out the other side. But like I say, how many there are, and only God knows, right? Because that scale of things, there's so many people who are going through different things. And I suppose it comes back to the rahmah part, right? Of why do we go through different forms of pain? And we know from Muharram to the tragedies around the world to our brothers and sisters who struggle, obviously there's the major conflicts, which everyone's aware of, like the politics of Palestine and the war there. But then equally, like we say, we were talking about Africa earlier, their history of like suffering, like you can go on and on. How many people have been through trauma which I could not understand and even put myself in those shoes because I come from a much more secure place, maybe even environmentally being in England. What's the reason they go through it? How do you balance that in your understanding of rahmah and justice and everything else? Like we said, it's difficult. You can only relate to your own experience fully and understand on the emotional level and try and support each other because everyone has a different degree of pain to experience in relativity based on what they can handle and what is planned for them. And we're just here to learn through the process.
Very well said. Okay, so we are almost towards the end of our program. We would like to wrap up. And are there any concluding words that you would like to share with everybody on today's topic?
I think, look, just to give kindness and understanding in everything we do. You know, what's coming in my mind is 70 excuses, 70 reasons. You know, why do we have these kind of teachings? Because ultimately, we all are living in our heads to some degree. And in that experience, we often can be inconsiderate of others, or we can seem on the outset, you know, to not be understanding one another, or we can equally be indulging in our pain somewhat, or not knowing how to get out of our pain, and thus displaying behaviors which people might find really hard to take. But just know deep down within all human beings, if we are created by God, we also have the ability to return to Him, right? And thus, you just got to show love and kindness to every individual, no matter where they are in their journey, and hope. And the rest you leave to God, because He's the director, He's the planner. You're all just another pawn, another actor within this movie. And so you just do your best to pass love to the other characters around you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that wonderful, beautiful message with us today. And once again, this was a very enlightening conversation with you. Very real, very authentic. And, what I like is that we usually bring in our personal reflective points as well, which I hope, will help even the viewers, because everybody, has their own experiences and everybody's mastering their own life journey challenges. So thank you so much, Brother Inayat, for joining me on today's program. It was really a pleasure to have you.
Likewise. Pleasure to be here.
So thank you to all our viewers for tuning on today's program. Please make sure to send in your feedback and your comments, if any, on today's program, and let us know what other topics are you looking forward to. And please make sure to subscribe to Lantern of Light's YouTube channel if you haven't, and make sure to give us a thumbs up. And please do keep sharing this program, this episode, to as many family and friends, family members and friends as possible, inshallah. And inshallah, I'll be catching you up in another upcoming interesting episode. This is your host, Sakina Habib, signing off. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sense.